Natural disasters happen every day around the world and in the United States, which is a very susceptible nation to many types. Let's continue the series of exploring the worst natural disasters in each state. Last week, we looked at the worst natural disasters in the first 10 states alphabetically. These states were plagued by events such as hurricanes in Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, and Georgia, earthquakes in California and Alaska, and floods and severe weather outbreaks in Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, and Colorado. This week, we're going to cover the next 10 states, including Hawaii, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, and Maryland. If you enjoy learning about geography and earth science, you found the right channel, so be sure to subscribe to my channel, Our World, Our Planet, Our Home. Let's get started. The first state we start with is a place known for being physically beautiful, Hawaii. While Hawaii experienced a horrible natural disaster last year, the 2023 Maui wildfires, it isn't the worst in the state's history. On April 1st, 1946, a magnitude 8.6 earthquake off the coast of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska triggered a tsunami. As all tsunami waves do, it traveled outward from the epicenter across the Pacific Ocean at the speed of a jet plane. The tsunami reached Hawaii in approximately 5 hours and created waves as high as 55 feet. The tsunami caused extensive damage to the coastal areas of Hawaii, particularly Hilo on the Big Island. Buildings, homes, and infrastructure were destroyed, and 159 people lost their lives, mostly in and around Hilo. Today, tsunamis are still regarded as being one of the largest threats to the Hawaiian Islands, even more so than volcanoes, considering that volcanoes only occur on the Big Island, and these volcanoes are usually sedate and slow eruptors. Back to the mainland United States, Idaho is a northwestern state that has a semi-arid climate, one that's pretty dry, especially during the warmer months. The Great Burn, also known as the Great Fire of 1910, is said to be the worst natural disaster in Idaho's history. A combination of dry conditions, high winds, and numerous smaller fires merging into a massive wildfire triggered this natural disaster. The fire burned approximately 3 million acres of forest land and not only affected Idaho, but also the neighboring states of Montana and Washington. Entire towns were destroyed, including Wallace, Idaho. Thousands of acres of forest were lost, along with valuable timber resources, adversely affecting the state's economy. At least 85 people were killed, including firefighters who were attempting to control the blaze. The disaster led to significant changes in forest management and fire suppression policies in the United States. In the Midwest, both Illinois and Indiana are not located directly in Tornado Alley, but both share the same natural disasters. The tri-state tornado outbreak of 1925 occurred on March 18, 1925, which is in the early part of tornado season. This outbreak produced 12 confirmed tornadoes, but the one that stands out was an F5 tornado which had estimated wind speeds of over 260 miles an hour. This large tornado originated in Missouri and traveled into Illinois until it dissipated in Indiana. Illinois took the brunt of it, as several towns in the southern part of the state, including Murfreesboro, West Frankfort, and Gorham, received extensive damage. In Indiana, the tornado caused extensive damage in the southwestern part of the state. It affected the town of Griffin in Posey County, where many buildings were destroyed. In Illinois alone, 613 people were killed and thousands were injured. And in Indiana, 71 fatalities occurred, along with hundreds of injuries. The individual F5 tri-state tornado remains the deadliest single tornado in U.S. history, with a total of 695 fatalities across all 3 states. The good news is that today, there is better technology than ever to detect tornadoes before they impact communities, thus giving people time to find shelter, ultimately saving lives. Another Midwestern state, Iowa, gets its fair share of tornadoes, but something else was the state's worst natural disaster, a flood. The Great Flood of 1993 lasted from May to September of 1993, affecting multiple states, including Iowa, along the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. The flood was caused by exceptional rainfall. Some areas experienced rain for nearly 6 months, with rainfall amounts reaching record levels. Many rivers in Iowa, including the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, reached record level highs. The Mississippi River at Davenport and the Des Moines River at Des Moines were notably affected. This flood did lead to some fatalities, but it wasn't extremely deadly. However, it was horrible in other aspects, as it displaced thousands of people and profoundly affected their lives years after. In addition, the flood caused billions of dollars in damage and led to catastrophic effects to agriculture within Iowa, especially to its well-known corn industry. This disaster highlighted the need for improved flood management and emergency response systems in the region. Further westward, Kansas is another Midwestern state that's within the region of Tornado Alley. But, like Iowa, a flood also caused the state's worst natural disaster. The Great Flood in 1951 affected eastern Kansas in July, particularly impacting the Kansas River and its tributaries. Heavy rains, with some areas receiving over 16 inches of rain in July alone, led to the rivers and streams overflowing their banks. The Kansas River, among others, reached record high levels. The river crested at over 40 feet in Topeka, far above its flood stage. Approximately 500,000 people were displaced and 17 people lost their lives. The floodwaters inundated large parts of Kansas City, Topeka, and other communities, leading to significant long-term economic and social impacts. In addition, the flood severely damaged railroads, highways, bridges, and other infrastructure, disrupting transportation and commerce. The Great Flood in 1951 led to significant changes in flood control and management practices in Kansas, including the construction of reservoirs and levees to mitigate future flooding risk. Kentucky, being between the Midwest and Southeast, is susceptible to severe weather, including thunderstorms, tornadoes, and heavy rain. Heavy rain led to the state's worst natural disaster, the Ohio River flood in 1937. This flood affected several states along the Ohio River, including Kentucky. The flooding began in late January and lasted until early February of 1937. Extraordinary rainfall over the Ohio River Valley, with some areas receiving up to 20 inches of rain in a short period, caused the river to overflow. The Ohio River Valley of Louisville reached a record crest of 57.1 feet, far above the flood stage of 28 feet. Other areas along the river also saw a record to near record crest. Approximately 1 million people were displaced across the affected areas, with thousands of Kentuckians among them. The flood resulted in around 385 deaths, although the exact number of fatalities in Kentucky is not precisely known. The flood caused an estimated $500 million in damages, equivalent to nearly $9 billion today. Homes, businesses, factories, and public infrastructure were heavily impacted. The 1937 flood led to extensive changes in flood management practices, including the construction of flood walls, levees, and reservoirs to better control the flow of rivers and prevent such widespread devastation in the future. On the Gulf Coast, Louisiana sees many tropical cyclones. The worst one in the state's history, and one of the worst in American history, was Hurricane Katrina. This storm started as a tropical wave that turned into a depression on August 19, 2005. On August 23rd, it became a tropical storm and eventually intensified into a Category 1 hurricane just before it hit the east coast of South Florida. The storm went over the state and emerged in the Gulf of Mexico as a tropical storm, and this is when the real trouble started. Almost immediately, it intensified back into a hurricane, and on August 27th, it intensified into a Category 3 hurricane thanks to the abnormally warmer than average waters in the Gulf. On that same day, Katrina strengthened into a Category 5 hurricane with winds of 175 miles an hour and started to strike northwestward and eventually north. Hurricane Katrina made a second landfall on August 29, 2005, along the Gulf Coast of the United States. It struck Louisiana and Mississippi the hardest, with the eye passing over New Orleans. Although it made landfall as a Category 3 hurricane, the storm was incredibly large and created a 25-feet storm surge, causing catastrophic flooding, particularly in New Orleans, where the levee system failed. approximately 80% of the city was submerged. Over 1,800 people lost their lives due to the hurricane and subsequent flooding. Hundreds of thousands of residents were displaced, with many never returning to their homes. Katrina caused an estimated $125 billion in damage, making it one of the costliest natural disasters in U.S. history. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed, infrastructure was severely damaged, and economic activities were disrupted for a long time. In addition, the disaster response was widely criticized for being slow and inadequate. The federal, state, and local government's failure to effectively manage the crisis led to significant political and social fallout. In the Northeast, Maine is susceptible to tropical cyclones and nor'easters thanks to its coastal location. But the worst storm in the state's history is the Great Ice Storm of 1998. The ice storm occurred in January of 1998, lasting from January 5th to January 9th. It affected the northeastern United States and parts of Canada, with Maine being one of the hardest hit areas. The storm resulted in up to 3 inches of ice accumulation in some areas. The weight of the ice caused widespread damage to trees, power lines, and structures. 700,000 people in Maine lost electricity, some for up to 3 weeks. The loss of power during the freezing conditions posed severe risk to residents. The storm caused an estimated $320 million in damage in Maine alone. The agricultural sector, particularly the state's dairy farms and apple orchards, were severely affected. In the Mid-Atlantic, Maryland has its fair share of weather events, including tropical cyclones, severe weather outbreaks, and winter storms. One of the most memorable events was Hurricane Agnes. Hurricane Agnes made landfall on June 19, 1972, in the Florida Panhandle, then moved up the East Coast, significantly impacting Maryland from June 21st to June 23rd. Agnes brought torrential rains, leading to widespread flooding. Some areas in Maryland received over 12 inches of rain. The excessive rainfall caused rivers, including the Potomac and Patuxent, to overflow. Thousands of residents were displaced by the flooding, and 19 people lost their lives in Maryland due to the storm. Many communities were cut off by floodwaters, necessitating extensive rescue operations. The storm caused over $110 million in damage in Maryland, equivalent to $700 million today. Floodwaters inundated homes, businesses, and infrastructure, leading to extensive property damage. Also, the flooding caused severe damage to roads, bridges, and utilities. In particular, the city of Ellicott City, which is notoriously prone to flooding, and parts of Baltimore experienced significant destruction. Natural disasters happen in all shapes and forms. U.S. states are vulnerable to virtually all of these types. That concludes the states for this week. Next week's episode will cover the next 10 states alphabetically. Tune in for that video next Tuesday, October 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to leave your feedback on this episode, please leave a comment in the comment section below. And remember to subscribe to my channel, Our World Output in Our Home, if you enjoy learning about geography and earth science. Until next time!